Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to the sheep pen, bah, where no goats are allowed. Happy Thanksgiving. Before I get into the message, I would like to tell you what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful that it seems like they've reached a ceasefire temporarily and a return of some of the hostages in the Palestinian conflict. And I am thankful that the God of love and peace is at work in the world, even while the God of war rages. So, peace. Praise God for peace. Thank God for peace. So I want to speak today on the message, which is the In Search of God the Father series. In this series, I hope to expose and show you the pathway that leads to God and the pathway that leads to the God of the Pharisees. Jesus said he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by him. One might say that this has been kidnapped from its true and hijacked from its true meaning. When Jesus said he is the way, he's referring to the way he lived. He's referring to the way he approaches things. He's referring to the way he teaches people to live. He's referring to his example. You know, he said that the pathway to destruction is a wide gate, and many find it, and that gate leads to destruction. He says there's a narrow gate that is the pathway to is narrow and winding, and few find it. I want to show you how different Jesus was in the way that he lived and the way that he taught us to live, and the pathway to finding truth in life, and how different that is from the God of the Pharisee. I want to show you how the God of the Pharisee has infiltrated not just Judaism, but Christianity and every other spiritual pursuit on earth that is not the way of the sage or the way that Christ taught us. You know, there's this thing called orthodoxy. Now, I'm not talking about the Greek Orthodox Church. I'm not talking about the Russian or the Eastern Orthodox Church. I'm talking about the concept behind the name itself, orthodoxy. What is orthodoxy? It's the belief that they have the truth. They found it. You don't need to look any further. Don't seek outside the circles that this is this path, and you must follow it this exact way. And if you don't, you're going to hell. If you speak out that there might be another path, if you say that we're wrong, you're going to be kicked out of the church, kicked out of the mosque, kicked out of the synagogue. You're going to be kicked out of society. You're going to be shunned. You should be cursed. You know, I heard a preacher recently, and you can find that in the Search for God the Father playlist. I believe I placed it there, where an evangelical minister condemns somebody who joined the Orthodox Church. And he claims that anything but his evangelical ideology, his idea of faith and grace and forgiveness, that if anybody preaches anything different, they should be cursed. They should be punished. They are enemies of God. This is the spirit of the Pharisee. This is why they crucified Jesus in ancient Jerusalem. And this is also present in the church. It's present in every religion. It is a signature of the God of the Pharisee. It is a signature that your religion is under the control of the evil one. Jesus said he's the way. That means follow in his footsteps. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. There is no resemblance to your modern day preacher or your big religious leader. There's no resemblance at all to Jesus. Their lifestyle doesn't reflect him. Their attitudes towards love and forgiveness and judgment don't reflect him. They judge everyone and teach you to judge. That's the concept of orthodoxy, is to judge your religion, your beliefs as right or wrong, and then condemn you for them and cut you off from the body. And this is very much opposed to early Christianity. Would you be surprised to learn that early Christians didn't call their religion Christianity? They didn't call themselves the church. They refer to themselves as the way, when they would secretly, because Christianity was illegal at the beginning, they would secretly go up to someone and say, "Have you found the way?" almost as a code. They considered their movement the way. And the way has several characteristics. These characteristics are through and through the polar opposite of orthodoxy. They're the polar opposite of spiritual authority and dominion and dominance. And I don't mean in the battle between good and evil. I mean clerical authority. You know, that's one of the things that I've struggled so much with in finding my own way to the narrow gate. And an obstacle for me was I come from a pedigreed background. I am the sixth, well, I should say my sixth great-grandfather was John Cotton, one of the founders of Puritanism, one of the founders of the Massachusetts colony, and his offspring have ran that church and ran it for generations. And so I come from this pedigree. I'm the son of a bishop. I was brought up in the way of a spiritual authoritativism, the concept that you do what I say, not as I do. You do what I tell you, and you don't listen to anybody but me. And that is not at all in line with Jesus, but more in line with the God of the Pharisee. Paul, who was one of the closest followers of Jesus and responsible for much of the New Testament, said that we're to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. That's very much in opposition to orthodoxy, which says this is the truth, here, eat it, or else. Religious wars, ungodly behavior of the worst sort, murder, assassination, treachery, has all been performed in the name of orthodoxy and clerical power. I would say that clerical power is the one thing that defines the God of Pharisee. If you are involved in a denomination, chances are the people at the top are enslaved to the God of the Pharisee, the God that Jesus called the devil, and called them children of the devil. This isn't necessarily a condemnation of Judaism as much as it's a condemnation of the clerical concept. This is why I call myself a sage and not a reverend. And it's been a stumbling block for me. I had to get over my attitude that, hey, do what I said because I said it because I know more than you. Because I've been ordained. Because I have apostolic succession back to Peter. Because I come from a genetic line of ministers who did great things. This is what the Pharisees said. This is what the Pharisees said to justify every ungodly thing they did. And it's an earmark of the false God. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm a Luciferian. I don't want you to think that I'm a Gnostic, even though there are things that I say that can be echoed in those movements. And I would say that at the basis, at the beginning of this, they had stumbled across something. But of course, the devil's right there to gobble it up and to pollute it and to misguide the people that are searching. You have the narrow winding path, which is when you leave orthodoxy, when you leave what the majority says, and you work out your own salvation through fear and trembling. When you get in hot pursuit of God, and you are unafraid to look for him anywhere, you will find him. Jesus says, knock, and the door shall be opened unto you. Seek, and ye shall find. Ask, and it shall be given unto you. So the truth is there, but it takes searching. It takes seeking. It takes knocking on doors. It takes asking questions, which is forbidden under orthodoxy. Don't ask me any questions. Don't question what I have to say. Don't challenge my statements. but just swallow it whole, like I said, because of who I am and what I represent. This is something I had to get away from before I found my way, before I found my way to the truth, to the inheritance of life. The pathway to life is through a narrow gate, and the pathway to the gate is narrow and winding, and few find it. So if your main opposition to me is that I'm unorthodox, if your main opposition to what I'm saying is that no one else is saying it, I would say that you're firmly on the wide path to destruction, and you will not find life, but destruction at the end of that gate. That you have to, by the example of Jesus, by the example of sages down through history, you have to leave the beaten path. You have to go into the wilderness, both literal and metaphorically, to find this narrow winding path that leads to life. Jesus said he's the way. The way is that narrow winding path. He is the truth. The truth you find when you find that narrow gate, and life waiting for you on the other side of it. So Paul said that there are certain spiritual fruits, the fruits of the Spirit. I believe it was Jesus who said, by your fruit you shall know them. That may have been Paul. Sometimes they're so close, they're almost identical. I know I give Paul a lot of hard times, but you're going to see as I progress in this study why that is. And actually I have a tremendous amount of respect for Paul, and I see him in some ways as my life kind of reflecting his. That we were both born into and raised up in and under the Pharisee God. But somehow we managed to find the narrow winding path. Somehow we managed to pull away from orthodoxy, challenge the powers that be, and find the simple truth that Jesus was pointing the way to, which leads to life. So, what are some of the characteristics of the sage? One is a removal from society. Sages do not engage in the competition of life. You'll find this to be true of all people who found God. And before Christ, it was wide open. I come against the concept of orthodoxy and the concept that God was only available to people of Jewish descent before Christ. I don't believe that's true, and I believe that throughout history, there were those that managed to stumble their way through the process of seeking, knocking, and asking until they encountered the true God. Of course, most all of those sages who found their way, the people who followed them were quickly led astray into orthodoxy, led astray into this God of the Pharisee, the God of war, judgment, hate, racism, and that this is the pathway that the devil is always trying to push us back to. But there are sages that have found this, both in the Old Testament, both in antiquity, and this is something that Luciferians, okay, let's get this right, they stumbled across this. And had they followed the pathway of the sage and stayed on it, they would have found God, but instead they were pulled into Luciferianism. As I progress in this series, I'm going to define what Luciferianism is, how you end up there, how what I'm showing you can lead you there if you're not careful. And I want to assure you that this is not the pathway I'm taking you down. I want to show you and teach you about a thing that was discovered, I think, by Gnostics, who would later morph into Luciferians. And it's the concept of the golden thread. And what they found was that they found basically sages, people who followed the way that Jesus taught, that followed the pathway of love, discovering the truth of God and the life everlasting. These are people that existed before Christ. These are people that existed in the early church. And you can still find sages today, some of them pastoring small churches, some of them evangelists who keep to themselves and only come out to preach messages at churches and go back to their private life. And people like me who have, who if it wasn't for this mass media available to me, this technology available to me, I'd probably be sitting under a tree somewhere, just teaching people who happen to stumble across me, who happen to find me unusual or different and want to listen to what I have to say. This is very much opposed to the concept of the bishop, the archbishop, the pope, the Pharisee, the Sadducee, and especially even the scribe. Because sages don't typically write things down. Their life is an example. They're showing you the way through the way that they live and behave. What are some of the signatures of the way of the sage, which is very much the way of Jesus Christ and the things that he taught? It's stepping away from society and embracing God's creation in the wilderness. It's finding the peace of God through silence and through searching. It's not through arguing Scripture. It's not even through searching through antiquity for the truth. It is more of a spiritual journey where you find God through prayer, through seeking, through humility, and that you manifest the love of God and the care of people. And this is, like I said, in stark opposition to your TV preacher, to your national director of any denomination. Those men are businessmen. They're money driven. They're eager to be recognized. They show out. They're braggadocious. They're prideful. They claim to have an exclusive path, and they discourage you from seeking. And they claim, we have it all figured out, just trust us. Well, I trust God. But the fruits of the Spirit are the true test. Jesus said, no good tree can produce bad fruit, and no bad tree can produce good fruit. You know, I had an interaction in my comment section this morning with a Palestinian who basically echoed the words of Christ. He talked about the fruits of the Spirit, defended Judaism and drew a line between Judaism and Zionism. And I think that their opinion of Judaism, as they stated it, was not based on the religion or what it taught or its history, but based on the fact that they had met some good Jews who treated them good. That there were good Jews out there that exhibited love. And they were very different from the Israelis that are in control of the country. And whenever I first came out with this channel, I brought the accusation of the Pharisee against the church of today. I preached against TV preachers, big denominations, big organizations, authoritarianism. And one of the big roadblocks that people would throw up in front of me and say, well, that all may be true, but that's not true of my pastor. My pastor is a good pastor. But this actually proves what I'm saying, that people find the way, the truth, and the life independently. They find it through the process of seeking and knocking and asking. They find it through connecting with God and His creation in the natural world. No sage is found living in society as a member of it. That to achieve that sage, that sage status, the first step is removing yourself from the chaos, from the influence, connecting with God in the natural realm. And, you know, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness fasting and praying. He was tempted by the devil there. The Alexandrian church fathers, the Egyptian church fathers, the desert fathers they're referred to, they would live in caves. They would go away from, they withdrew from society. They were serious, so serious that nothing else mattered. Their pursuit of God, the Father, was so serious that it took precedence over everything else. The earmarks of the Pharisee are greed, power, control, judgmentalism, orthodoxy, the opinion that they are right and have the exclusive right to teach the true faith. Jesus said there's a way to achieve it. Jesus said once you find it, your fruit will identify you. What is the fruit of most denominations? How do they judge their success? It isn't by the love that their people have for one another. They judge their success financially. They judge their success by how many people they can put in the pews. They judge their success by how much infrastructure they can build. Their temples, their monasteries, their cathedrals, their giant churches, their jet airplanes, their fancy clothes, their high-dollar haircuts, their three-piece $3,000 suits. They also take pride in their ability to argue the scriptures, to argue the history, the past, to prove their pedigree, to prove their right to lord over you. But Paul taught us to seek out our own salvation with fear and trembling. In this series, I would like to show you the pathway, the way to find the narrow, winding road. I can't lead you to it and put you on it and tell you these are the bumper rails. There are no rubber bumpers in the game of spiritual bowling. Right? Just gutters. I can only show you the necessity of seeking it. And I can only tell you that you'll know you find it when the Spirit of life resides in you, when the love of God is present in your heart. You know, one of the things that brings me to tears every time someone says this about me, they say, Sage, I don't know if I believe anything you say. I don't know if I agree with you. But I watch you because I can see your heart. That's the proof of my pedigree. The love I have for people. You know, it says we should covet the good gifts. And I do covet, I wish I had the healing hands that Jesus Christ had. I wish I even had the lesser gift that my own dad in ministry had. I saw him lay hands on the sick and they would recover. It was miraculous. But my heart shows you that I have found the Father. I have found my way to truth, and I bring life. Because of my heart, because you know that we're disciples of Christ by the love we had for one another. And I wish I could lay hands on every one of you that are sick. But that's not one of my primary giftings. Yes, I have laid hands on the sick and they've recovered. But I have other gifts. The gifts of exhortation. The gifts of speaking, public speaking. I have an amazing musical gift that had to come from God, because it fascinates and befuddles even great musicians, the way my musical mind works. But I have the gift of peace. This is my greatest gifting in the Spirit, is that I can heal the brokenhearted just by looking them in the eye, just by being near them. It even translates many times right through this electronic device, straight to you. Many of you here have been healed because of this ministry. Many of you feel peace when I talk. You know, a lot of people, some people would get insulted by this, but I find it a great compliment. They say they put me on and then fall fast asleep, that they almost use me like a sleeping pill. And some people would say, well, that means you're boring, Sage. No, it means you can feel the peace of God in me, because I found it. My childhood was tragic. My childhood was violent. I had a violent time through school. And my anger was monumental. People that knew me then can't believe I'm the same person, because I was so angry then. And I'm so not angry now. Sage rage is a thing, but it's something that I'm slowly overcoming. It's something that is being healed in me. And that peace I was given and have been given, that peace that has transformed me, I've also been given the gift to transfer that peace to other people. People who are in my circle say that one of the most amazing things about being around me is the peace that overcomes them. So as much as I wish that I could lay hands on a crippled person, maybe I don't have the faith in that. But I also think it may be just my own preference. Because, you know, people that take their own life occasionally will take their own life because they are experiencing physical pain that is unbearable and they want to put a stop to it. This is what's behind medical euthanasia. However, most people, the overwhelming vast majority of people, take their lives because of the emotional heartbreak, the emotional pain that they carry. And what you're seeing in tears here is not my own emotional pain, but the empathy that I have for people that are hurting and brokenhearted. And that is one of my primary gifts. And so I said all this to say that I want to introduce you to something called the golden thread. This is proof that people who seek God find Him. And it's not through orthodoxy. It's not through established religion. Sometimes people find God and they lose themselves in orthodoxy. Or more likely, their disciples get eaten up with the spirit of the Pharisee, the God of the Pharisee. And they bring their church into orthodoxy. They bring their religious ideas into mandatory control and judgmentalism. And they go from guide to dictator. It's a good way to put it. A sage is a guide. A guide is just someone who's been there before you. A guide is a seeker who found. A dictator is someone who seeks to control you, who seeks to utilize their power to exploit you, to enslave you, to be dominant over you. A sage never ever forces his opinions down anyone's throat. Feel free to unsubscribe. Feel free to follow me or not. All that matters is that I pushed a button on this device and I give you the truth that I've found by following the way of Jesus, the way of the sage life, the way that leads to truth and life, the way that leads to peace, love, joy, long-suffering, forgiveness, acceptance. It's the opposite of wrath, the opposite of judgment, the opposite of war, the opposite of hate, the opposite of racism, the opposite of elitism. There's a golden thread. If you Google this, it's going to lead you to Luciferianism. Please don't Google it. But it is the concept that there is a thread, a golden thread, and this is the image that God gave me, that all of religion is like a piece of cloth. The different denominations and subsects are when you take this religious cloth and cut it up into something usable. But woven throughout all religion is a golden thread. This golden thread is the way of the sage. This golden thread stands in opposition to spiritual authoritarianism. This golden thread has a fruit that's attached to it. It doesn't matter what root is connected to, the tree bears fruit. And no tree that bears good fruit can be called a bad tree. Jesus cast out devils and performed miracles. So did Elijah. I believe so did Enoch. Enoch had the ear of God. Enoch could have a conversation with God. And those are just the three that I would mention, because those are the three that did not lose their way. All three were translated. All three reached what the Buddhists call enlightenment, what we would call being ascended into heaven. Enoch went with God until he just went on home with God instead of coming home one day because he walked with God so much. Elijah was carried up in a fiery chariot to heaven. And Jesus ascended to heaven and overcame hell, death, and the grave. There might have been others, but most others, like me, struggled, found the truth, but never reached that purity. I'm going to keep working right until my last breath. Maybe I'll get translated. Maybe I'll get ascended. Maybe I'll reach enlightenment. But I can tell you, I have found the way, the truth, and the life that Jesus spoke of. And you won't find it through organized religion, unless you stumble across the few that are operating undercover in the kingdom of religion. These are the pastors that my viewers defended. These might very well be the Jews that the Palestinian person who commented in my comment section was talking about. These are people that live the law of love. They keep the commandment of love. And they seek the truth with all of their might. And they're not afraid to leave orthodoxy to do it. Some of those are pastors who work undercover, who preach what they preach, and who they're affiliated with doesn't really matter to them. They don't fight over the things that separate denominations, but they focus on the true golden thread that is found in every denomination, in every religion, on every continent, before Christ, since Christ, and up until the return of Christ. You will find this golden thread of seekers who find the way of the sage, the way of connecting with God. They were in hot pursuit of God the Father, and many of them have found them. But most have taken the wide path to destruction, and few have found the narrow, winding path. And I hope to point you towards the path. I can't make you walk down it. I don't say that if you don't walk the pathway that I walked, you're not good. I'm saying if you walk the wide path, you'll find destruction. That you have to break away from the norms. You have to reprogram your thinking. You have to step away from all forms of religion and embrace the way. And I do this through the example of Jesus Christ, through what he taught, through Paul, who was also a sage. And we'll talk more in future episodes about Paul, because either Paul was pulled into the Pharisaical way of thinking in the way that he set up the foundational aspects of the church, or the Pharisee spirit found its way into the church through other means, and they retroactively adopted Paul into it and put words into his mouth in certain books. If you fear what I'm saying, if you're afraid to knock, if you're afraid to seek, if you're afraid to ask, if you have fear of what I'm saying, chances are you're under the influence of the spirit of the Pharisee, who Jesus called the devil. That the devil doesn't want you to look. The devil doesn't want you to knock. He doesn't want you to seek. He wants to sell you a bill of goods and demand that you follow it the way he tells you to. That's not what Jesus taught. Jesus gave us a simple religion. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. He passed this on to his disciples, who founded a body of like-minded seekers, who only later, after many decades, began to really exclude one another and create orthodoxy. And the spirit of the Pharisaical control was transferred from Judaism through the Old Testament right into and infecting the way, the truth, and the life, the true followings and teachings of Jesus. Jesus said, whoever is first shall be last. Whoever considers themselves first. The spirit of competition, the spirit of ranking, the idea that there's a hierarchy and that there are certain people who are authorized to speak and others must remain silent unless they're parrots of the speaker. This is not what you find in anybody who exhibits the fruit of the Spirit. The Spirit of the, if you're in the Spirit of the Lord or the Spirit of Jesus Christ, it's freedom. There's freedom to search, to knock, to ask, to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, to seek out, to leave orthodoxy and the wide path of destruction for the narrow, winding road to the narrow gate. And I hope to show you historical facts that prove this through the course of this series. And I hope that you continue to watch. I ask that you support this channel through your donations to PayPal, Cash App, things sent to my P.O. Box, all of which are found in the description of this channel. And I leave you with this powerful prayer. May God surround you in his ring of fire and hedge of thorns of protection. May the Father send you angels of sufficient rank, authority, and number to defend you from demonic influence and torture. And that's what I'm looking for. Possession? I don't know. I'm blowing this prayer. I pray the peace of God finds you. I pray that you find the narrow, winding path that leads to life. I pray that you are able to have the courage to step away from the wide path to destruction and find the narrow gate for yourself. And I pray that you exhibit and produce the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, forgiveness, acceptance, all the ones, humility, the ones Paul named and the ones he left unnamed. In Jesus' name, amen.